record on this computer. Perfect. All right, welcome everybody. This is our July continuing education workshop. I know it says Tammy Jackson, but my name is Timothy O'Sullivan, and I'll be conducting the workshop today. So can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, let me go ahead and start that from the beginning. Perfect. I'll move this over to the side. Awesome. So today's topic is going to be a clear method for free conversation with anyone in ESL. We were just talking about how this field is very interesting today because it allows us to communicate in things that are really important, like the medical field, maybe in the aviation industry. We'll see how that turns out when this pandemic settles. But communication is a general skill, and I think beyond just for the purpose of teaching English, we could probably apply this to our daily life. So let's take a look. So I like to update this every time because it's like the real-time increase in certain metrics. So what I'm going to focus on today is what I've learned doing your grandfather clock.
Sorry about this. I have to step away for a medical call.
No trouble. Let me go to mute. That's pretty awesome. I had a grandfather clock when I was young, and like a small one on the wall.
Wow.
Right? It was pretty cool. So yes, I'm going to try and draw on the experience from just doing teaching online, and usually that's conversation. So that's where I have the 75,000 minutes, and I've met 1,092 students. Of course, I haven't worked with them maybe so extensively. Some of them, you meet them and you say goodbye, you never see them again. But I want to bring that how to have a good first meeting to this presentation, and then how to just have a conversation in general also. So let's go ahead and move on. Today we're going to look at 4 main items. The first one is clarity as a principle. I think that's probably the most important thing for communication. Then we're going to talk about getting oriented. So this is when you meet somebody, how do you orient yourself to match their English speaking level, and also to produce a good effect, a good result in the interaction. Then we're going to look very closely at that. So what makes the student leave 5 stars? Because as a tutor online, you do get one metric, which is your overall rating. And I'm not the best, so I don't have the highest rating online, but I think I know what is important to get the 5 stars, and we can look at that and see how that applies to communication. Right? And then we'll look at techniques for each student level. So what you'll probably be doing when you meet a student who is at a certain level, and so on. Okay, so let's first talk about clarity as a principle. I'm trying to make a system of principles for myself, like rules about how to act. And right now, clarity is number 2. So I think it's pretty important. I call it systematic clarity, and I have 3 points underneath it. The first one is know exactly what you believe in, who you look up to, and how you make decisions. Number 2 is systematize and improve the above through experience and testing. So I've been making this thing for a while, and I know the first version I made was not good, not completely correct for me to succeed in my daily life. So I took notes and I tried to improve it. That's the second point. And then the third one, which is what we're going to focus on today, it's actually one of the most important, which is communicate simply and clearly. So what does that mean? So when you're communicating, what is not clear? What do you think, Donna?
What is not clear? Well, I can use myself as an example. I am an analytical thinker. And so, for example, every summer my husband and I plant a garden, but I am never pleased with the layout of the garden. So, so I would like the garden to look a certain way analytically. I would like to see things lined up. I would like to see a pathway, and I think he just sees plants.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that would be, in my personal life, an example of something that is not clear in my personal life.
Yeah, if you have a vision in your mind
Yeah.
and you need someone else to implement it,
Yes.
it seems they need to understand. And
Yeah.
if they don't, and you don't know they don't, you'll get the results you're not expecting.
Exactly. Exactly. And this can happen in the classroom as well.
Mhm.
If you're trying to explain something to the student and the student is not getting it, I usually say that is my fault, because I think as the teacher, I have to meet them where they are. I cannot expect them to meet me. So go back to the drawing board and try to come up with another way to explain whatever it is, if it is proper
Mhm.
nouns or, you know,
I agree.
yeah.
So, Britt, is it all right if I call you for the next one? I'm gonna unmute you.
I muted it because my birds are being very loud right now.
Don't worry, they can participate. This
Yeah.
is relevant because you were telling me about the present perfect tense. So we just had a little bit about what is not clear. What do you think it means when we say something is not simple? What is not simple?
What is not simple? I guess what we were just talking about, that tense. Quiet. Gee whiz.
It's not simple to talk with a bird.
Maybe I'm gonna go to another room
Oh,
because I'm on the Chromebook, so
okay, that's nice. You can move around.
move around and close the door. Sorry, birds.
Very
Yeah.
free.
We don't want to hear you. There, that's better. Woo.
Very nice. So that wasn't so simple.
So, yeah. So we're saying instead of trying to use that past perfect tense, we could reword it with just the simple past tense and some kind of a clause, prepositional clause to explain it that way. So there's always a workaround.
Mhm.
If there's something that's too complicated, you can make it simpler.
I think some things are larger than they have to be. So, and the parts are mixed together. So when I told you as an alternative to the present perfect tense or the past perfect tense, you could use something that is clear, like I was studying, and then just have a prepositional phrase. So it's a completely different piece. At that time, I was studying. So you have two very distinct pieces, which make it easy to see. It's simpler because they're divided. When you say, I had been studying, the meaning that's contained in I had been studying, there's three verbs there. It's not exactly clear what's indicated by each one. So when you separate the time component and the action component, it becomes simpler to see, I think. Maybe clearer also.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at the last question, who benefits and why? I know Wendy just came back, so I'm going to answer this myself. So who benefits? I think it's both the person you're communicating to and yourself. Going back to Donna's example, if she has a result she wants, she is going to receive that result only through the clear communication. And that saves everybody time. The person who executes the action, the person who has the vision. So basically, it's both of us. Why? Because
I
they're.
have to excuse myself. This is a call from Trinidad, so I must take this.
Go ahead, no trouble. Go to mute. All right, so let's move on to the next section. This is about getting oriented. So when you meet a student for the first time, or even if you're meeting them again, how do you adjust yourself and start the conversation? So, based on experience, and this has been confirmed by the community of tutors who work online in the same capacity that I work, this template basically is probably the best thing you can do. If you stray from it in a little way, maybe there's no difference, but this seems to be something that never fails. So, it's pretty easy. Hello, my name is Tim. I'm from the United States. What's your name? My name is something. I'm from somewhere. Nice to meet you, and you repeat the name, which is good because you can now make sure you pronounce it correctly. And then they'll respond, nice to meet you too. How are you today? And the conversation opens up. It's really easy. So, in the world today, I think most people have the aspiration to learn English. Maybe they don't have the time or the real necessity, but I think they have the aspiration to learn English. And therefore, if you attempt to speak English with them, I think they would enjoy it, and you might be able to have a conversation with anyone, maybe. So this is what I recommend to start. Whether you're using online or maybe if you're traveling, I think you can use this to open up a conversation. All right. From that kind of exchange, the introduction and then the how are you, you should be able to identify the student's level. And I have 5 here. The first one is fundamental beginner, which means that they're not suited to conversation. So like I said, maybe you can talk with anyone, maybe not. If they don't know any English at all, probably they're not suited for a conversation. And this happens when you're teaching online. You might meet a new student and they have the aspiration to learn English, but they don't know any words at all. So it's not a good place to start with a conversation setting, though you can help them, and we'll talk about that. Second, basic. So if they know enough English, and that's not so much, we'll see, it's actually not so much, then you can have a conversation if you can support them professionally. Right, then intermediate, things are starting to get interesting, and most students are in this zone, and the support that's required of you to basically make the conversation move is not so extensive, and you have a lot of content to correct. Or I should say, you have a lot of feedback to provide, which makes the lesson very useful for the student. When you move on to the advanced stage, in principle, the student can communicate basically as well as they need to, but it's not perfect. Maybe there's a pronunciation issue, which is probably the least significant. Or maybe there's subtle things, which if they miss, you won't misunderstand them. Like using articles, the, and. Usually you know what they mean even without it. However, I think there's more work here than in intermediate, because now you have to be very vigilant in watching and listening carefully to what the student says, to find those small things and to correct them gracefully so that you don't interrupt the conversation, so that the student knows where they're making their mistakes and can focus on that area. Finally, proficient students. This means there's basically nothing to correct or do. You might ask yourself, well, why are they here? The reason is they are interested in people and they just want to talk with you. So that's why I have True Friend. It's not about learning English anymore. It's just about meeting you and talking. So when you have a sense of the level, whether it's one of these 5, fundamental, beginner, basic, intermediate, advanced, or proficient, when you have a sense of the level, you will know what English will be clear. And you may get a sense of this with practice, so you know that if I try to say something with this vocabulary word, probably they might not know it or might not be able to use it. So you would choose something which is a little simpler. So let's look at that a little more deeply. So how simple can you make the language? According to the Oxford English Corpus website, they have over 2 billion words in English. So probably they add to this as words are invented. However, the top 100 words make up 50% of English. So most of what you say in here is only 100 words. I should say half of what you say in here is only 100 words. Even when you have 2 billion possible words to express the names of different things in English. It means that if you start with the foundation of English, probably you can communicate with anybody as long as you control the conversation actively. Continuing with that idea, if there's 2 billion words, English constructions, which is the full sentences and the paragraphs, those can be infinitely complex. I don't think you can put a limit onto the possible combinations you can make in English. But any sentence, I think, can be reduced to something better. And by better, I mean something clearer, something simpler, or, and this is probably the easiest for us, the commonest ways. So even if there's something very simple, we might know, oh, we say it this way in English. I actually want to ask your feedback on something. I was talking with a student from China, and he wanted to compare electric cars, and he said oil cars. I said, I don't really hear it as oil cars. The way I would say it is cars which run on gasoline. And that's not so simple. It's a few. How would you say it? I don't know the answer, so I'm asking you. Would you say oil cars versus electric cars? Or would you say cars that run on gasoline? What do you think?
Internal combustion engines.
True. Yeah, so again, we have the commonest way, the way we say it, versus the simplest way. Cool.
I was saying, I guess I would say gas powered. Yeah.
Gas powered. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have a lot of options. And you can say, well, what is the best way? Probably some combination of clarity, simplicity, and frequency of usage. That's probably the best option you can choose. Okay. Working from the base, working from the English that most people should be able to understand. I think people can learn the 100 commonest words in a language in the first day. So if you wanted to learn Gaelic, so my family on my father's side is Irish, and a relative invited me to learn Gaelic, and I said, well, if I could learn the first 100 words, that's most of it. Why not? So if you start with the base, you can have a conversation from that point. So here, these are the steps you can take. You can start with the template exchange, which is, hi, my name is Tim from the United States. What's your name? My name is this. I'm from here. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. How are you today? Today, Now the student opens up what they're saying. So whatever they say, you can start from there. If they say, today I had an important project, it's like, oh, what was the project? I had to do this. And if they miss a word, then you can correct at that opportunity. Or you can provide them with a more advanced word. So they say something, and you say, well, actually, there's a commoner way to say it in English. It's this. So you're building from what they're saying. That's how the conversation is building. They have an English, which you can identify. And from that, you are trying to push the limit. There's a better way to say it, just if it's simpler, clearer, or more common. Okay? So yeah, that's basically the rest of these things. The student opens up, you build on what they say. So you're pushing the limit of what they know. Do you know this word? If not, then you can introduce it and ask them to use it. Having the student use it is very important, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so matching the complexity to the hearer. Over time, you would develop a sense of the art. Now, I don't know if when I started doing the English teaching online, if I had a sense of if they would know the word, but now I feel like I have a sense of what is a good word for their level. I think it probably came with experience. So the more you teach English, the more you will have a tiered stock of vocabulary that can be helpful to the student. Okay. In general, you should avoid unnecessary complexity in every case. This is probably not just true for ESL conversation. This is probably true for our life. We want to avoid unnecessary complexity. If it's not an issue, then by all means be free. I know when I have conversations with my friends, sometimes I just say whatever I'm thinking, and I don't even know if he understands it. But that's not a problem. We're just basically enjoying each other's company. However, I know that some sentences in books probably would not be suitable to spoken English. It's only suitable if it's on the page and you can track how things are. These are like long list items. For example, I read some books from the 1700s, like Benjamin Franklin's autobiography and Wealth of Nations, and they use the semicolon over and over and over again. So you have this long, long sentence that takes up the whole page. It's like, well, you know, that's not good for spoken English. That's probably good only if it's on the page. All right. So take a break. Any questions on what we've covered so far? Any comments? All right, let's go ahead and keep moving. So we have 2 topics left. We're going to talk about what makes the student leave 5 stars, and we'll talk about techniques for the various student levels. So first, these are the most important factors, I think, that determine if the student will give you a good rating or not. And I'm talking in terms of rating just because it's a metric I see, but I mean the rating should represent the overall impression the student had from talking with you. I hope that reflects some kind of true quality, like if you actually provided them a benefit. Maybe it does. I think probably it does, but we'll talk in terms of rating, and these are the factors. So can you rank them? Which of these factors do you think is the most important? Let me go through them quickly. So English practice time for the student. The purpose of the interaction was basically for the student to improve their English. It means that most of the time that you spend together should not be you talking, but the other student talking. It depends on the learning setting. If you have a huge lecture hall full of biology students, it makes sense to have one teacher talking. If you're having a one-on-one interaction, probably most of the mental exercise should be for the student and not for you. So that's why I say English practice time for the student. Keep the balance on the student side. Being graceful. What do you think being graceful means? How about Wendy? She missed the last, actually she did contribute. Thank you very much. What do you think, Wendy?
So I honestly would probably describe that by including the qualities in the next line. That's what it means to me, being graceful, like listening with attention and respect. That's what that would mean to me. I can't think of anything else.
To be honest, it was not easy for me to separate those two, so I agree. However, sometimes you are actively listening and, you know, very interested, and you admire the student, and through eagerness you want to say something when in fact they haven't finished, even though there was a brief pause. The same time for synchronizing when you start talking. It's not easy to explain, but I think it's kind of like a dance. So you have to understand how each one is moving. If you're out of sync, there's crashes. And sometimes it just depends on each student's mood, or I should say your mood and the student's mood at that time. I've had students who are, or I should say I've been awkward on certain days. So not just with one student, with every student, I keep stepping on their toes, and I don't know why, even though I think I'm listening with attention and respect. So not easy to explain, but I think grace is just taking turns adequately. Listening with attention and respect probably involves that. I think you have to concentrate also. So there's a little work in the concentration factor there. Okay, so we just talked about those two. Let's talk about correction delivery. So this has a few things, like when you give your correction, are you giving it in a respectful way? Are you giving it in a way that's not going to hurt the student's feelings? Are you giving it at the proper time? If they're in the middle of saying something, you don't want to interrupt what they're saying, probably you should hold it and then wait for the right time. That's grace again. Frequency. There may be many opportunities to correct the student, but probably you should not say every one, because then you're not going to get past the first sentence. Then importance. Sometimes you might correct something which is actually not important, and the student was not going to like that. For example, I once met an IT student, and for whatever reason, when he was talking about a certification, I said, well, maybe you could say certificate. It's not really an important difference. Why did I make the correction? I don't know. Anyway, thoroughness. So making sure that you don't let things that are important slip by. That could be more involved for correcting writing. Now, the last one, improving emotional condition. It basically just means, are you energizing the student? Are you soothing the student? Today, a student came to me, and she is the public relations person for her company, and she had to argue with some magazine that wanted to do a story about her boss, and his schedule was delayed because well, I'm not going to explain why, but he was angry at her for whatever reason. So when she came to the lesson, I had to do some soothing. And the last thing is entertaining. So today I had an 8-year-old girl who basically speaks English fine. I guess I'm basically the entertainer when she comes to the lesson. So we play games together. So with that brief introduction, what do you think is the most important of these factors for getting the 5-star rating?
Now, I would guess putting the time in with the practice time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Practice time for the student.
It's a good idea. Any other possibilities? I think they're all essential.
Yes, they are all essential.
Mm-hmm.
They are all essential. I was saying I would go with the last one. You cannot teach a student who has problems, you know, if it's worrying about money or family or, you know, a death in the family or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so I think once we work with the last one, then we find ourselves in a certain place to be able to do the others.
It's an excellent point. So let me show you how I've ranked them. It's exactly the order I showed you. Yes. I think even if you do the English practice time for the student, like they do most of the talking, but for whatever reason, the emotional effect at the end, so whatever the situation is at the end, I think that will determine what the rating will be.
Okay.
And the value of what you do kind of depends on the correction delivery. Because even if the student is talking for the entire session, which is possible, they want to know if they're doing it correctly. So making sure that you provide the feedback, that's the most important resource. To do that, you have to listen carefully. You have to make the student feel like you respect them. Sometimes this could be a stressful situation. I've met doctors and engineers and IT people who have, I guess, very advanced fluency in their own language. And now, for whatever reason, they're trying to learn English at some stage, and it's frustrating. And I think making sure that the respect in that situation is very important. Okay, being graceful, I think it's the most forgivable. Like if I step on someone's toes in the conversation, usually it's okay. Oh, sorry, please, you go first. It happens all the time. All right, and then English practice time. Again, this is all essential, so make no mistake. This is all essential. But you can fill 30 minutes with good content or awkward content, and it will make a big difference in the impression. Okay, so let's talk about the two most important ones. That's going to be correction delivery and the emotional condition. Okay, so first point, you should not correct every mistake that the student makes. You want to have the impression that this is something smooth and not awkward and not laborious. Like if you stop them at everything and we try and correct it, it's going to stretch out the time and it's going to be frustrating. So the rule of thumb, which was given to me by the community when I started, and it seems to be true, is that one correction every 5 minutes is sufficient. It creates the impression of a smooth conversation, and the student comes away with enough things to remember. In fact, if you give too many corrections, you might say you're being thorough, but will the student remember them all? It might be better to do just 6. So once every 5 minutes and 30 minutes. That is probably something which is easier to understand and remember. Okay, so should you correct an unimportant mistake? A slip is what we call something that even we do in English. So I will make mistakes in English. I know it's incorrect. It's just my mouth and my brain. We're not working together. Same thing with the students. If they say something which you know they understand very well, they just made a mistake, probably you can move past it. If you want, you can give a brief note. Okay, vocabulary with nearly the same meaning. That's like what I was talking about with certificate and certification. Oh, I just got my certification. Oh, maybe you mean certificate. There's no difference. So let that one slide. And then thoroughness. For advanced students, it's very important. So you need to focus on what they're saying and look at the small details. But probably this happens more in writing, reading, and vocabulary practice, which means it's actually not conversation. So usually the thoroughness of your feedback is most important in these types of practice, not so much in conversation. All right, any questions? Let's move on. So when you're using a video software, some sort of video call technology like Zoom or Skype, maybe Google Meet, you have a chat, and the message system is probably one of the best ways to deliver your corrections. One reason is while you're listening attentively, you can write the correction and it will be there when you're done. So you're not going to break their train of thought and you're not going to break your train of thought. It'll just be there at the end. Also, depending on what they're doing, some companies, and if you record a Skype call, for example, you can match the time of the correction to the time in the video. So they can look at the correction and go back to what the video was and actually see what was happening at the time. It's very useful. Okay. Again, if they can see the message, that is easier to understand than trying to explain it to them just with your words. They can see the full sentence and the difference between what they said, if you write both, what they said and the correct version. Whereas if you try to explain it so they have to think about it in their head, it's not as clear. So using the message system to deliver your corrections is a huge advantage. Okay.
Are you talking about the chat on the side of the Zoom?
Yes, that's where you can do it in Zoom.
Okay.
It's the same in Skype and Google Meet. If you type a message, you might have to open it because it won't display on the screen permanently unless you have the chat window or the chat bar expanded so that it's constantly visible. I think you should have it constantly visible. Okay, so improving the emotional condition. I think there's 3 basic results that you can strive for. That's energizing the student, soothing, or entertaining the student. So when I say energizing, I just mean that whatever condition they were in, it's not ideal for a back and forth. So maybe they're tired, maybe they're stressed. Depending on the kind of stress, you might need to soothe. But if you can get them engaged and interested in what you're talking about, that lends to the flow of the conversation as well as the impression. So if they come in stressed and they leave stressed, you basically did not affect them in a positive way. It might not be your responsibility, but if you can, the best result you can achieve is to improve the emotional condition. Soothing again, if you, this is when they're on the other side. Now they're too agitated. So you need to have them be brought back in. So today I told you about my student who had a fight with some magazine person. And I told her, have you ever done sports? Like when you're doing boxing or something like that? And sure, you fight at the time, but it's just what you do. There's no personal emotion involved, right? So you're like the soldier for your company. You have to fight against the people from the public. It's nothing personal. It's just each other's jobs. And whether or not she agreed with that, I think it was enough. It was a satisfactory rationalization that we could move on to a different topic. Okay, and entertaining. If you have an interesting conversation and it's energizing, probably that's overlapping with entertaining. However, a child, if you energize them, probably you will lose control of the conversation. Like if you start with a game, it's going to be hard to move out of the game, back down to something serious. However, from what I can see, sometimes the only thing you're there to do is to entertain someone's kid. That's fine, I'll do it. Anyway, the best way to influence someone else's emotions is to control your own emotional condition. So what you bring to your lesson with your student will affect the other person. if you want to produce a good emotional effect, you need to control your own emotional condition. So here's 4 techniques you can use to basically improve yourself before you meet the other person. The first is something like a quick primer. What does this mean? It's like, whew, that's it. So you go in and then you answer the phone, hello. That's one method, and it works. So if you have you don't have to sit down and meditate for 20 minutes. I mean, that could work, but probably you don't have time. So if you can just center yourself, it's going to make a big difference, right? If you want to actually have a positive experience, probably you could access your memories also. So if you can think about things that make you happy, it will have a real effect on you, and that will transfer in your conversation. Your mood has a gravitational pull on the other person's mood, just like theirs does. You want to be the anchor who has control over the result. So if you want a positive result, probably you should control yourself so that you anchor yourself in a positive place, and that will pull on the other student. At the same time, it will help you resist their pull if they're in a negative mood. Music is something I like to use to control mood. So if you want to be inspired, if you want to be relaxed or energized, I like to be energized, you can use music. For this call, I didn't actually listen to any songs, but I hummed and I sung some songs, which energized me, and I thought that would produce a better condition for me to talk. The other one is acting. Probably these things all go into acting, but if you move yourself, if you smile, probably it will make you happy, just because it's not coming from the mind down, it's coming from the body up. So if you loosen up your body, probably your mind will loosen up also. Those are just 4 techniques I think can improve your condition, and if you have a good condition, you can influence your student's condition. Okay, so the last one is a little long. Let me just read it. So since you will do most of the listening and the student will do most of the talking, you have time to consider what to say next. So you can ask yourself, if I say this, will it energize, soothe, or entertain the student, depending on what result you think is necessary at the time. So you can actually ask yourself that question in your mind, or you can build the habit so that you consider, if I start talking about this topic, how will she feel? And from there, you can direct yourself in the direction you want, which is to produce the good emotional result. Okay. However, these are always essentially bets. You don't know what effect you will have. So if you say something that the student is not pleased with, like apparently you disagree on a subject, or you don't have a common interest, you can correct yourself. So you know where you want to go. You want to go to an energized, an entertained, or a soothed situation. And even if you go off course, you can go back. Okay, so I think that's everything here. Okay, any questions before we talk about techniques for the various levels?
No.
Do you use any of these emotional control techniques? Do you use quick primers in your life?
Yes.
Okay, so Donna does.
Yeah.
Yeah, Donna's been teaching for a long time, so she knows that if you want to have a good effect on the student, you probably should have a good condition for yourself.
Yes, so my teaching with ESL over the years has not been continuous, but it's there. What has been continuous is my background with early childhood education. And so yes, you definitely need your primers there.
Yes,
Yeah.
excellent. All right, so we're almost done. Let's talk about what you will probably do in a conversation with the various levels. So here we have the levels: fundamental, beginner, basic, intermediate, advanced, and proficient. Okay, so let's talk about fundamental beginner. This means that they're not suited for conversation at this time. Probably in order to communicate, you will need to use a translator to politely advise them what they should do. Probably they should not be paying for a conversation application because they could buy a book and work with that, and it would save them a lot of money. But it is possible to learn with another person. So it won't be so much of a conversation. It'll basically be full-time instruction, which is fine. So you can express that in the translator and build up from there. But again, you can still impart a good emotional condition. So if you meet somebody and it turns out you can't talk, you can still show respect. You can still make them happy. Probably it will be better for both of you. Okay?
What do you mean by use a translator? You mean an actual person translating, or do you mean using an online?
Good question. I didn't even think about the person. So I was thinking about like Google Translate.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, if you use Google Translate or some other app, which is, I'm sure there's other ones. The software I use, it's built in. So that's what I mean by a translator.
Okay.
Tim,
Yes.
I do not know if it is my computer, but the presentation seems to be blinking. Is anyone seeing that?
No.
Oh, so then maybe it's me. Okay.
One thing I can do is I can stop the share and then reshare. So let me try that for you. Okay, so we'll do that, and then I'm going to share the screen again. All right, and that's that one. Share. Okay, still blinking?
Yes.
I don't
So
know.
maybe it's on my end.
Hopefully it will pass.
Okay.
It seems that the internet is like the weather. So if you have, it looks like some clouds are overhead right now. And there's not much we can do except hope that technology improves.
I know.
So let's go ahead and do the,
Thank you.
no trouble. Next, there we go. So if the student is basic, which means you will be supporting them extensively, my impression is basically you are an interrogator because you have to ask questions to make the conversation move forward. So after you have them open up, how are you today? Pick up on something that they said and keep in mind the factors which lead to 5 stars: grace, listening attentively, improving the emotional condition, and also, I know them because I wrote them, correction, so the quality and frequency of correction. So if you keep those in mind, I don't think you'll make a mistake, but especially remember the emotional condition. And when you pick up on something that they said, don't try to ask questions that start with verbs. Like, did you do this? Because the answer will be yes or no. Was it hard? Was it fun? Yes or no. They're not open-ended questions. Apparently these are called closed-ended questions. I'm not exactly sure why. Language is fascinating, but apparently if you start with a verb, you will answer with yes or no. For a basic student, it's too heavy for them to say, yes, I did this, and so on. They will probably just say yes, no. Like a child. So if you want to have a conversation with a teenager, and you ask the teenager, did something happen? They will say yes, no, and so on. The language requirement has brought the student back into an earlier communication ability. So you need to support them and ask questions that will require them to open up. And those questions are our how, why, when, what, who, and where questions. So those produce an open-ended response. If they say something simple, like they make a statement in answer to your question, asking why is a good question that will require them to continue. For example, in Japan, there's two main cities. There's Tokyo and there's Osaka. And there's a little bit of rivalry between them, probably the same way there's rivalry between Boston and New York. And the coronavirus situation in Tokyo is worse than Osaka. And I was talking to a woman from Osaka, and I asked her, she said that the situation is not so good in Tokyo. And I said, why? She's like, why? And then she could open up, right? So any sentence, any statement a student makes, you can say why, and it goes deeper. In real life, the interrogation probably is not productive. People don't like you just diving deep into everything they say or questioning everything they say. But in this context, where the student wants someone to help them talk, the more open-ended questions you can ask, the more you help them do that. Okay? When they say something incorrect, probably the best way to deliver the correction is to type it, and then you can talk about, this is what you said, and this is how we actually say it. You can make extensive use of acting. Vocabulary will still be one of the limitations for a basic student. So if you want to act something out, that will make it clear for them to understand what you're doing. It's not hard. It's not easy for me to, off the top of my head, give you an example. Oh, I guess maybe I was talking about reclining at a beach. So I do the full motion, if I'm talking about reclining, I have to do the actual thing. Okay, and the last item, whatever new thing you teach the student, you should ask them to attempt. So if they learn a new word, they're learning it in a context and they say, yes, I understand what it means. You must ask them to use it, because even if they have an intellectual understanding, they have an intellectual understanding in one context, which is the one that you've shown them. Now ask them to make an original example. That is the best way for them to remember how to use it. Okay. Let's talk about the most important questions of all. The first is, how are you? So that opens up conversations, apparently. The second one is this. When you say blank, what do you mean? And I think that's useful in any conversation, not just in ESL. So when someone says something and you want to understand it better, in the first place, in this ESL context, it's an open-ended question, so they get to talk more. But in general, you are conveying that you are listening attentively and you care sincerely about understanding what they have to say. It makes everything clearer for both people. If they say something vaguely, and you want to understand, well, what do you mean when you say this? Then they can evaluate what they said and understand it better themselves, and you gain a better understanding also. So I think that is one of the most useful questions in English teaching. When you say blank, what do you mean? Probably you should teach it at the basic level. Okay. Intermediate, which is, it's the middle, so it's where most students end up. Most you will encounter are going to be in this situation. You should transition out of interrogation. They have experience with probably several tutors, and they've been interrogated by everyone. So it's time to not ask about, well, what do you do for a living? How's your family? Where do you live? That's enough. You can have a freer exchange. You don't need to control everything, which means you can express your own view and tell them what you think about a subject also, not just trying to ask them, well, what do you think? Why do you think that? And so on. So you can do that with statements. If you make a statement, you're not asking a question, but you say something which the other person can work with. So maybe they can ask a question, but the best, in my experience, the smoothest way is to say a statement that the student agrees with, and they'll say yes and continue. That's kind of like energizing the student. So if they're talking and then you express your view, it's satisfying because you get to say what you're thinking, and they agree. So yes, and then you go forward from there. Okay. I don't recommend disagreeing with the student because, again, the most important result for your rating is the final emotional condition. So anything that can disturb that path will probably put you at risk, not in every case, will put you at risk of receiving a lower rating or a lower overall impression. But if you find someone who you know you can talk with, or who likes arguing, some people like arguing, so that's actually a positive for them. Okay, let's talk about the advanced situation. And I think there's a lot of work when you're dealing with an advanced student if you want to benefit them, because you really need to exercise your concentration. They can use complicated sentences, and they can talk about complicated ideas. And again, you're trying to listen more than talk, so you'll be focusing on what they're saying. And you should catch the small errors and deliver them in a way that does not interrupt the smoothness of the dance. So when you think about it, you're polishing and putting a fine edge on their English. I bought a hatchet because I have a kind of like a campsite in my backyard, and it came blunt. So there was no edge. It was completely flat. So I had to buy stone, and it has two sides. One side is the coarse side, and one side is the fine side. And it took maybe 2 hours of circling the stone on the axe to get not a sharp edge, but a suitable edge. Then you had to switch to the fine side. And that was another, I gave up. So honestly, I didn't finish. But that was another hour. So that's where you are now. When you go out of the intermediate, you're out of the course, just pounding away at the blunt edge. Now you have to put on the polish and the fine edge. So that's where you are with the advanced. It takes a little more focus too. Okay, so let's talk about the proficient stage. I think there's very little pressure here. As long as your personalities match, this is basically just an exchange from peoples from other parts of the world. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so any questions?
Oh, go ahead, Donna.
Oh, well, I just wanted to maybe after class talk to Tim a little more about teaching online. So your question might be more applicable to the.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I guess it wasn't really a question, just a comment on some of the information presented in the last couple slides about ways to have the student open up in the conversation, because we normally start our conversations the same way, and no matter how I ask the question about how she is, I always get exactly the same 3 words. I am fine, and she never elaborates, and I'm always so even that one little suggestion is so I find so helpful about, okay, well, when you say you feel fine, what does that mean to you? And so that'll be helpful to, you know, obviously I move the conversation along to other topics and we do some grammar, but the conversation still requires a lot of work.
Awesome. In some situations, the student's life is actually not eventful, and you've known each other, so you basically you've explored all the parts of their life, and there's nothing more to say. Sometimes it does happen, and in that case, you might want to meet someone new. That's one solution. The other solution is if you can find small talk topics like movies.
Yes. Yes.
I actually have a bonus slide after this, so I'm going to give you guys one more slide.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and look at it since it's relevant.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So, looking at the bonus slide, this is topic control. So, the best possible topic you can find is the spontaneous topic, because the feeling is natural. You think and talk at the same time, so it's not like you're trying to remember. I think that's a different mental process. So if you're trying to remember, you're not so much thinking, and it produces a different effect. If you've heard of Dale Carnegie, his main thing in his life was speeches, and he said, when you memorize your speech and you try to recite it, your mind is going backwards. Your mind is not going forwards. So that's why the spontaneous topic is probably the best, because you're thinking about it and saying what you think at the same time, not trying to remember what you planned. That's why I have the PowerPoint. So yes, I made a structure, but I don't plan what I'm going to say. I just see it and I'm like, this is what I want to, this is how I feel about this idea. Okay. Prompted is the other solution. A prompted topic is one that you can bring or one that the student can bring. A lot of students like to take responsibility, so they'll bring a news article to talk about. And in English, I've shown you engu.com. I've shown Brit for certain. I don't know if, I don't think I've shown Donna or Wendy. This is like a full English news article for the purpose of teaching English. So you could have something that's not a waste of time if you just read the article and studied the vocabulary and did the discussion questions. But usually we open up the article, we see something, and we start talking about it, and that's the spontaneous conversation again. So if you bring material.
Which articles are those? Which articles are those?
I'm going to type it in the chat. I think I can do it here. So I'll give you a link. This is to everyone. This is Engu. Oh, my goodness. There we go. Also engu.com. Okay, so I think I sent that to everybody. If you can see it in your chat.
Yes.
So if you go there.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, go to the materials and the daily news. You can use that for an article lesson. So you just used it the whole time, just fine. Or you can use it as a stimulus. So you make a comment about it and that opens up the conversation. If the conversation flows, there's no reason to stop the flow. Okay, let me go back. If I hit an arrow maybe, let's take a look. Cool. Okay, you can bring it if you want. But again, this is basically a bet. You're betting on what you think the student will find interesting. And it seems that if you choose a boring topic, the student will disapprove of it. It's like, oh, this guy's not so cool. He doesn't know what's interesting. It's better if the student brings a topic, because if the student brings a topic, now you can approve of the topic. You say, oh, that's a great idea. I'm like, oh, really? I'm so happy. And the conversation moves in a positive direction. Whereas if you come, it's like, what do you think of this? It's not so good. Okay. Then again, there's unavoidable topics. So Donna mentioned that it's hard to teach a student who's worried about something. Maybe they're worried about money, maybe they have a medical problem. So personal things that happen in their life you can't avoid. Top of my student's mind today, she had a fight with that person. So the first thing she's talking about is, oh, how are you? Oh, you know, I'm kind of mad. But then there's also world events. So for the past 3 months, I think every day I've talked about the coronavirus. And I think the students have a lot of practice talking about pandemics. Probably they're experts in the vocabulary. But yeah, there's some things you can't avoid. So yeah, maybe if you want to move the conversation forward, Wendy, you can use something to prompt the conversation. Or you can just try and delve deeper. What do you mean by that? Okay, that's everything. I'm here for any questions. And let me go ahead and stop recording.
Okay. I'm good. Thank you as always. I'm going to say thank you and leave the meeting.
Cool. Thanks, Wendy. It's great to see you. I'll see you next month.
Good to see all of you as well. Thanks. Bye.
Okay,
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Very helpful.
okay.
I'll see you next time, Britt.
Okay.
I'm going to
Thanks.
turn this off. It's somewhere here.
I think you're still recording.
Yeah, let me stop the share. That way I have the full controls. There we go.